Hello and welcome to the module Metacognition, the Missing Link to a Deeper Think. My name is Leslie Zeroy and I'm a Reading Language Arts Consultant here at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Today we will cover 4 main points. First, we'll take a look at what metacognition is, what's involved when we say the word and implement the concept. Next, we'll think about why you should even care about this topic. I wanted to include this because it is an aspect of Common Core instruction that I think has only sort of recently come to light, and it has the potential to really be a game changer. So let's look at the so what of it all. Then we'll get into the phases of metacognition, and finally, of course, some tools and resources for you to use tomorrow. So off we go. Let's begin with a little self-analysis. Take a moment and rate your own level of knowledge and expertise with this topic. Are you a novice just starting to learn about it? Or an apprentice, you know a little but need some more information? Or perhaps you're a practitioner. You've done it before but don't have it nailed yet. Or maybe you're even an expert. Take a moment and decide. And when you're ready, if you're sitting with someone else, you may want to have a conversation about that. Alright, so let's watch a quick video that describes metacognition really well. Listen for what is required when practicing metacognition. See if you can distill it to 10 words or less when we are finished.
Cognition is the realm of thinking. Metacognition is the realm of thinking about thinking, not thinking about the phenomenon of thought in general or the nature of knowledge in the philosophical sense, but reflecting on your own thinking process. If cognition is what happens in your mind while you're engaged in learning, metacognition is what happens in your mind when you're engaged in monitoring and managing your learning. Consider painting a self-portrait. There are 2 levels of activity. There's painting, the touch of the brush to the canvas. Then there's metapainting, the painter's awareness and regulation of the painting. As the metacognitive painter reflects on his work, he draws on his knowledge of painting in several ways: an awareness of what colors complement each other, an understanding of which brush strokes produce different effects, and the discernment of when to apply different techniques and use certain brushes to achieve the desired result. The reflective painter also manages his own painting as he goes along. He is mindful of how he plans to use the space of the canvas. He monitors his progress to make sure he is staying on track. And he evaluates his work, constantly checking that the paint on the canvas reflects the image on his mind and in the mirror. Whether it's painting or the knowledge and skills of any other discipline, we want our students to not only be critical and creative thinkers, but also to become reflective about their learning. As students face an ever-increasing demand on their attention and an ever-broadening world available for consideration, an important part of helping them think for themselves is helping them think about their own thinking.
So right now you may want to stop and talk to a partner about what you heard and share how you distilled it to 10 words or less. But for now, I'll keep going and say that basically metacognition is thinking about one's own thinking. It is the ability to be self-aware and monitor how you are doing with both the content and processes involved. So, what's the big deal? Why is this important, and why do I as a teacher care about this idea? Well, I don't know if you've experienced this, but kids do not always see the connections between their actions and outcomes they get. Are any of you parents? I know my son was always sort of surprised when he did something terrible and then had consequences. It was like he'd never even thought anything would come with it. I've worked a lot in the court school system, and these kids are notorious for not thinking about their actions. Hence the reason they are there, right? Well, what is interesting is that kids really can be taught to see that what you do equals the outcome you get. They so often think that life, and especially school, is sort of predetermined. I'm either good at school or not. I get good grades or I don't. I enjoy learning or not. It seems to be sort of black and white for them. When I first started working with kids who are incarcerated, their attitude was clear. We aren't students, this isn't real school, we're your gangsters, that's all we'll ever be. Well, 4 years later, a complete overhaul of the instructional program and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears by the teachers. Okay, not literal blood, but you get what I mean. These students now say, I'm different. I can learn. I have goals. I'm going to be something when I get out of here. This is what got me rolling on the metacognition piece. By making learning relevant and personal, and having students look closely at what they get and don't get, and have a plan to address it, really changed the whole game for them. If those kids, the most in risk kids, can completely reverse their position of themselves as learners, it struck me that all kids need this kind of support. What metacognition does then is to show explicitly that learning, and life for that matter, is malleable. You can change things. There are strategies that can help all of us be better, get more, enjoy more, learn more, grow more. Some people, kids included, seem to have an innate sense of this and can sail right through. But many students need help accessing this ability, and that's where we come in. So what it comes down to is that certainly kids can think, but it's really about how they think. And our job is to teach them to think in different ways, and even in some cases more effectively. It is giving opportunities for them to think about both what they are learning and how they are learning it. One huge reason to delve into this world of metacognition is because of the Common Core state standards. These standards require that students think deeply, conceptually, and handle multiple complex tasks. They need to not only articulate their thinking about content, but also share ideas and processes for problem solving with others. It's a tall order. Case in point, the ELA standards highlight the capacities of a literate individual. These capacities, demonstrating independence, critiquing, evaluating, understanding other perspectives, etc., require students to do more than learn content. It's more about processing content and utilizing it for making claims, arguments, solving problems. Metacognition is a pathway we can use to help them maneuver through all of these things. Also, metacognition is an executive function that needs to be taught. Research indicates that for many students who have learning problems, their inability to efficiently retrieve information previously stored in memory negatively impacts their ability to accurately express what they know. Metacognition is a way to pull that learning back by thinking about how we learn. So here's a few examples of folks who did not think through some real-world problems. You can see not great solutions here. All right, so we know we need students who can problem solve, who don't panic when faced with a task. Many students give up before they even start just from sheer fright and panic. The task seems daunting, or the content is new or overwhelming. Metacognitive practices can alleviate this. We also want them to be critical thinkers, to think deeply and persevere when it gets tough. This one is hard because a lot of what kids face these days is easy, cheap, or free. Think about apps on their phone. And it's fun, and it's right now. Complex text and complicated tasks are neither free, quick, nor easy. They require mental capital. They often necessitate collaboration and outside resources. So we'll take a look at how metacognition can get us there. All right, so let's look at the three phases of the metacognitive process. They are planning, monitoring, and reflecting and evaluating. The first step, of course, is planning. Planning in the metacognitive sense refers to looking at three variables: the person, the task, and the strategy. Person variables means to look at our own strengths and weaknesses and think about what might be easy or challenging given the task. The second is the task variable. It's looking at what the task is actually asking of me, what the cognitive and skill demands require, and asking, can I do it? Will I struggle in certain areas? What might be challenging about this? The third is the strategy variable. What can I do to help myself, knowing the tasks and my skills? What tools do I have to use? These three fall into the planning phase because looking at them can help alleviate the fear, panic, and sense of overwhelm that sometimes paralyzes students. If we take a moment to look at these variables with students before starting an assignment, it sort of levels the playing field. It allows us to all step back and take a strategic approach before jumping in. So here's a life example. Let's say I'm having a dinner party and I perceive myself to be a terrible cook, but I'm going to give it a go. The person variable is that I can't multitask in the kitchen. Cooking a meal is really about multitasking. I know I get distracted and burn things. Next is the task variable. I know I will have multiple things going at once to complete all 3 recipes for the meal. I will need to be organized. Last, I need a strategy to set myself up for success. I'll get all of the equipment out so I'm not searching for things. I'll chop and prep all the pieces. I'll use my timer so I don't forget anything on the stove, etc. So in taking a minute to think through all of this, my chances of being successful are far greater than if I had just jumped in haphazardly. I may not get it all perfect, but by using some strategies, I will at least get more of it done well. In math, for instance, I freak out with word problems to this day. Never could quite get them down, and I've always had a bit of a phobia about it. My excuse is, well, I'm a language arts person, it's my strength. Well, the truth of it is that if I had broken it down and used some planning, I'm sure all of that could have been somewhat alleviated. So, for example, if I, the person variable, know that I freak out with word problems, the task variable, I could do a close reading of the problem and chunk it to figure out what it is asking me to do and what computations I need to put together to solve it, which is the strategy variable. Before a metacognitive process, I was doing really the same thing I described earlier. I was making it about, I'm not good at math, instead of, I just don't have a process. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's the so what. It can be taught. It should be part of our lessons and is not really difficult or complicated to incorporate. So let's look at what you can do. First, have students break down the task you have given them. They should restate it and be able to pull out what the steps are. Next, talk about how they should proceed, what strategies to use. The key here is to have students talk about this and come up with ideas, not the teacher telling them what to do. This is critical. The point is to have students think about what issues they may have and what strategies would best help them. In the beginning, they may not know which strategies to choose, so some teacher work will need to be done to offer suggestions. But ultimately, if students discuss it, throw out ideas, and develop a plan, they will own the process. Other steps in planning: set goals and a deadline so it can be sequenced and planned into manageable chunks. This seems sort of obvious, especially for older students, but believe me, it is amazing how students do not do this. Their sense of overwhelm paralyzes them and they don't ever get started. I have to admit that I still do lots of self-talk when I start a project. Like this particular module on metacognition. At first I just avoided working on it. Then I looked for video clips. Then I finally looked at the whole project and broke it into sections based on my 4 outcomes and so on. And I'm a, seemingly capable learner. Maybe you're the judge of that, I don't know. And I still felt overwhelmed at the beginning. But knowing that I have lots of tools and strategies to fall back on helped me to organize and get going. Here's a look at what one teacher does with a strategy called Be Sure To. It's one of her tips for both reflecting on classwork and setting them up for the homework. Take a look.
One of the last steps I always like to ask students to perform is some sort of reflection. I want you to be able to think of some be sure to's. I like to ask my students to think about a be sure to and often craft their own be sure to statement. And this requires them to perhaps pull one aspect of a rubric or a task that I'm asking them to do and articulate what that task should be. Now that you've just read this model essay, what should we be sure to do or not do? We can even think about it like that, and that will help you write your outline as homework. So when students write, I will be sure to, it's somewhat like a goal statement, and it's somewhat like an action item for them to be able to perform the next day or in the future. Mary, a do or a don't do?
I think it's really important to use appeals.
From paragraph 3, like the person repeated a bunch of stuff, so we shouldn't do that. Don't bore.
In crafting a be sure to statement, students can focus in on what action item they will perform and that they will actually apply. What are you going to now be sure to do during your speech based on what you saw?
I said loud voices and not shake when you're presenting.
This allows students to both think about what they saw today and then use that observation in planning for the future.
Okay, so again, you may want to stop and talk about what you saw with someone else that you're sitting with. But for now, here's what I'd say about it. I love this simple be sure to technique because it forces reflection on what you saw, heard, or read in someone else's work and in your own. It shows students that there is room for growth and we can make and take suggestions to do better and make the task easier. It's simple but effective. Okay, moving on to phase 2, monitoring and adjusting. Here's where we've already got a plan of action, and so now as we implement that plan and start working on the assignment, we monitor our own learning and pause to see, am I making progress on the task? Am I struggling with any aspect? Have I made adjustments to help myself or asked others for support? Here's the sticky wicket. Sometimes students don't know they are struggling. They don't realize they have gone off track. This is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult aspects of teaching self-awareness. Sometimes it's simply because they haven't taken a minute to stop and reflect. They just plow on through the task. But other times, it's because they don't recognize where it went off track, and that's where collaboration comes in. I like to have students pair up and debrief with another person. Show them where they're at in the assignment, how it's going so far, ask for advice, feedback. Okay, so not all students are good at asking for or giving feedback, but like we saw in the Be Sure To video, with practice, they can get better. Let's look at how one teacher uses a simple method called traffic lights to get at monitoring learning.
In this edition of Proven to Work, pupils judging themselves and helping each other. We'll be showing how self-assessment and peer support are being used in the classroom, and then hearing from one of the country's leading experts in education research, who will tell us why the approach is proven to work. These Year 7 pupils have been writing down their impressions of a book they've been reading for RE. They're now being asked to assess what they've written using a traffic light system.
If you've only described it, think red. If you've done a bit of explaining, think amber. If you think you've been wow, then think green. Quite a few greens, some oranges, a red. So you're not feeling very confident about it then, so you want a bit of help on it. Yeah? Okay, good. That's really honest. It's really good that you're asking for help.
The self-assessment became more accurate the more it was used.
At first they're awful at it and they do underestimate their own abilities, but eventually they get better and better, and the more you show them what is expected of them, then the more they get used to it and the better they become at it. I want you to go and sit next to somebody who hasn't done as well as you. Everybody now should have someone next to them that they can talk to and ask, how to improve, so that everybody understands where we've got to so far. They're always honest about their self-assessment, and they're always honest about each other's work. They're very critical of themselves and each other, really. They're really honest about how to help someone improve.
You still did good. You've explained it quite a lot, so you've done good there.
If a friend's telling you something, then you're more likely to listen, because it's worth far more sometimes than what a teacher will say to them, what a friend will say to them.
Why did you put a red card up?
I didn't get the story that much.
You really don't think you've done a good job? How have you helped your friend here?
I've told her to include more detail and describe things more.
According to the Centre for the Use of Research and Evidence in Education, most teachers use a system of assessment during lessons, but many fail to use the assessment to inform the next part of the lesson.
What's different here is teachers using and designing assessment into the learning process for two reasons. One, to help the pupils take more charge of their own learning, and two, to give them a window into the pupils' learning. What's interesting about the traffic lights was that in this instance she was developing work. Pupils were fairly confident, not very many reds, and so she knew there was enough knowledge amongst the class for them to work in pairs, to help each other. If she'd been using it for developing understanding and she'd had 2 or 3 reds, then one of the things the research says that is really helpful at that point is to have the oranges and greens students working together, so that she can then concentrate on the reds where there's a real issue about basic understanding.
Okay, so again, if you'd like to stop and chat, please do so. If we think about this tool of traffic lights, what I saw was a way to safely monitor your progress and get immediate support if needed. The key seemed to be in making sure what each color signified. Red was if you had just sort of given basic information and hadn't expanded much on your thinking. So by pairing them up then, those with the red cards could see what their peers had done and how they had moved beyond basic details. The other takeaway for me was in the informing of next steps in instruction. So if most students had red cards, the teacher could clearly see that they were all struggling and needing more support before carrying on with the rest of the task or lesson. The other thing about this tool that makes it okay is that it makes it okay to say that you are struggling or you think you may need help. Creating this kind of culture gets kids out of the right answer culture of school that students seem to carry with them. It allows for learning to be a sort of messy process that is not always about right or wrong answers. I love that. All right, so on to phase 3, self-reflect and evaluate. Lastly, it would make sense to do a bit of reflecting upon completion as well then. This is something we fairly regularly skip. Students finish their work, turn it in, and we all move on. But if we started to work in reflection time at the end of lessons and assignments, students would have a chance to think about how it went, what they learned, and what strategies were useful, or not. And in hearing how others face the same tasks and how they address challenges would not only go a long way for creating that culture we were talking about, but also give great strategies for dealing with the complexity of learning with complex text and tasks. Let's watch a fun way one teacher does this. Take a look.
All right, so you should have out your cell phones, please. We're gonna do a little texting this morning. Usually we're asking kids to put their cell phones away, but today I wanted them to use their cell phones to text in some formative assessment for me. Text to this number, 37607. And once they started to do that, up on the screen pops up all of these sentences about what they learned yesterday. So a couple of neat things happen. First of all, the students all have this affirmation because they see their idea, their learning very public for all of us. And it's anonymous, which is really nice in a context like this because students are then able to, I think, be very honest about what they did or didn't learn. This has been really helpful for me because I know now exactly where we're at and the things that we can build on and the things I want to make sure to clarify. But I want to turn this into a word cloud. And so within about 90 seconds, we're able to take everything they texted, put it into a word cloud, and I can see very quickly what the overarching learning was yesterday. Yeah, we're feeling pretty good about archetypes, it looks like. This is also instant. I can walk around the room and I can hand out papers, and at the same time I can be glancing up and seeing what people are texting in. And so I am able to have a real clear sense of where the class is going to go today. All right, so let's kind of take this, and since you're feeling really confident about archetypes, maybe we should start there.
Pretty cool, huh? I love this little technique because not only is it fun for kids, but it's valuable for both students and teachers in what it produces. A clearer picture of what students got from the lesson, and it's virtually instantaneous. And just by changing the question that students text a response to, you can use this to gather all sorts of information. It's so fun. And it shows kids that technology can be useful for more than Instagram and keeping up with the Kardashians. Okay, so we're winding down now. Let me share a few other tools for teaching metacognition. Be sure to download the items that go along with this module so you have all of the teaching resources. The next few slides refer to strategies in the packet shown here on the slide. Okay, so let's look at a few tools for classroom use. Thinking stems. Such an easy reminder to have these pre-printed on cardstock in student folders or portfolios, sitting on desks, or hanging as a poster in the front of the class. It can be a visual reminder to stop and think, and to even model thinking. Own it. So I found this example and loved it because isn't it all really about creating students who own their learning? Who can see what they put into it affects the outcome they get? This would be a great poster to also have up and in folders. Okay, so these 6 reading strategies are not new, but some of the questions have been tweaked a bit to get at thinking about your thinking. I like to give this to students during a reading lesson and then have them write about which strategy they used that day and how it worked for them. Then you can have a few kids debrief so that the class can see the different things students did to make sense of it. So this little form could be given along with assignments and turned in with the content work. It helps the student to plan, monitor, and reflect, and it helps you as the teacher to see their process and how it went. I'd say this one is for later in the process, when students are comfortable doing all of the phases of metacognition and can easily articulate what they have been doing. Here's a quick written template for post-lesson reflection. Before collecting an assignment, teachers can have students address these questions and submit with their work. I particularly call attention to how much time the students spent and their perceived success with the task, so that students begin to make that correlation. And finally, let's not forget our own self-reflection. As you lesson plan, consider these things, not just the DOK level, but also these other factors, such as how did you encourage your students to think about their thinking in the lesson? And did you include ways for students to regulate and monitor their own learning? Were students asked to articulate their learning process, etc.? And of course, to also post-lesson reflect what went well, what did students respond to or struggle with. I find that as with most things, the more we teach it, the better we become at it ourselves. That brings us to the end of this module. I hope it was useful. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.